Kindly stand, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Minister of Home Affairs and Information, the Honorable Wilfred Abrams, SC, MP. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information, Ms. Yvette Goddard. Representatives of the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information. Chairman of the National Council on Substance Abuse, Mr. Hadford Howell, and the respective members of the Board of Directors of the NCSA. Manager of the National Council on Substance Abuse, Mrs. Betty Hunt. Deputy Manager, Mr. Troy Wickham. NCSA Research and Information Officer and BARDIN 2023 Report Presenter, Mrs. Laura Foster. Members of staff of the National Council on Substance Abuse. Respective heads of departments and representatives from BARDIN contributing agencies who are joining us both in person and online on YouTube and Instagram. Respectively, the members of BARDIN include the Psychiatric Hospital, the Substance Abuse Foundation, the Government Industrial Schools, the Forensics Sciences Center, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Edna Nichols Center, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, the Center for Counseling Addiction Support Alternatives, the Barbados Prison Service, and the Barbados Police Service. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to have you join the National Council on Substance Abuse for the release of findings from the 2023 BARDIN Drug Information Network report. We are happy to have you here as this activity forms part of our Drug Awareness Month activities for 2025. But it is indeed a pleasure, more so, to now invite our most industrious and committed chairman, our venerable chairman, the pride of the NCSA, to deliver the welcome, none other than the chairman of the board of the NCSA, Mr. Hadford Howell.
I'm going to use your soapbox as well. Good afternoon to all. And thank you, Madam MC, the indomitable Paul Yvette, who always finds different words to describe anyone coming to speak after her. So you've got to try and get one back in her from time to time. The Honourable Wilfred Abrams, MP, Minister of Home Affairs and Information, Miss Yvette Goddard, Permanent Secretary, and Miss Kathy Shepherd, Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information. Mrs. Betty Hunt and Mr. Troy Wickham, Manager and Deputy Manager of the National Council on Substance Abuse. Dr. Ronald Chase, Chair of the Programme and Finance Committee, who is a Director, and other Directors of the NCSA Board, staff and members of the NCSA family. Volunteers, of course, are included in our family. Department heads and or representatives, specially invited guests, including attendees who are online, whether they're local, regional, or international, and I know some of them have tuned in, so welcome to you all. And members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful good afternoon to everyone. It is again my honour and pleasure to welcome you to the National Council on Substance Abuse for the released findings of the 2023 Barbados Drug Information Network, BARDIN report, which Mrs. Foster will deliver momentarily. The early risers among us who tuned into Morning Barbados today on local Barbados TV would have gleaned a sneak peek of what will be presented, but the rest of us need not hold our breath for much longer for the interesting reveals. Like last year, this BARDIN report is again the penultimate calendar event in the NCSA's robust 2025 Drug Awareness Month of activities held every year in January. Our theme, Strengthening Prevention, runs throughout the month. And I can say runs throughout the month, it's not ended yet. So you would have heard and seen NCSA's enthusiastic pursuit of activities which were designed to prevent and reduce Barbadian substance use and its abuse. That old Bajan saying, prevention better than cure, remains applicable today. It is the NCSA family's purpose and the message I believe we will continue to project and pursue successfully to all Barbadians. Prevention is better than cure. I'll say a bit about the Memorandum of Understanding which sort of formed the basis of the background to how we were able to collect this information. At the conclusion of NCSA's Drug Awareness Month of activities on 30th January 2019, the then Minister of Home Affairs stated at the release of the BARDIN 2016 report, and I quote, "BARDIN is a key element of the national response to the local drug problem, a response which devolves from having a consolidated source of data from both the demand reduction and supply sectors, which can inform effective policy making and programming." He outlined 5 BARDIN objectives. 1, strengthen the capacity of Barbados to respond to changing drug use trends. 2, provide current epidemiological and other information on substance abuse. 3, regularly update this information. 4, identify trends in drug consumption and offences related to illicit drugs. And 5, provide information for the planning, evaluation and management of drug control programs. The Minister also called on the NCSA to establish MOUs with our main stakeholders so as to formalize the reporting relationships and obligations of network members. NCSA sought thereafter to establish a collection method that was reliable, whereby evidence-based information would be gathered and shared, thus enabling the exchange of relevant, cutting-edge information, ideas and perceived trends, and even anecdotal finds on a timely basis to help offer realistic solutions on how best to fight, stop, or at least reduce the substance abuse challenge we face. Put simply, NCSA craved more cooperation and collaboration. This resulted on 26 June 2019 in the NCSA signing MOUs with our stakeholders, namely the Centre for Counselling and Addiction Support Alternatives, CASA, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, the Edna Nichols Centre, Financial Intelligence Unit, Her Majesty's Prison, the Substance Abuse Foundation, the Psychiatric Hospital, and the then Royal Barbados Police Force. Now, of course, we have the Barbados Police Service. And we can add to that our newest contributor, the Government Forensic Science Centre. The NCSA is grateful to all of the above-named agencies for contributing to most of our subsequent BARDIN reports and the findings. The recently established Early Warning System, EWS, is a testimony to such collaboration and cooperation, evidenced only last week, Wednesday, by participants at a well-attended EWS one-day workshop. Now we must bid a sad but fond farewell to our beloved PS in the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information. She's joining us online, but she's winding down. I wish she was winding up, but she's winding down. The NCSA could not miss this opportunity to publicly say a big thank you and a fond farewell to her. Our sincere thanks go out to UPS for your unwavering support for and contribution to the life and work of the NCSA agency since 2023. Several actions exemplify your areas of work related to the NCSA, but I mention just two examples. One, your friendly, wise counsel and timely contributions made at all of our Board of Directors meetings. And two, your help as part of the team which enabled Barbados to become the first English-speaking Caribbean country to assume the chairmanship of the expert group on drug demand reduction of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Commission, CCAD, for 2025. So that is set to take place in Barbados in September this year, when we, Barbados, will host a 3-day hemispheric conference. And so again, on behalf of the NCSA family, we wish UPS a long, well-deserved, happy, healthy, and exciting retirement. It's time to relax, put your feet up, and do the things you've always wanted to do, but could not find the time to do because of your hard work in the ministry. But you'll now do all of those things at your own pace. Again, a warm welcome to you all, and we look forward to what's coming this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for those heartfelt words of welcome, Chairman Howell. And certainly, as espoused by our industrious chairman, this year the NCSA continues to work with our respective stakeholders to strengthen prevention. In this vein, we certainly are blessed to have at the helm of the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information a stalwart, an ennobled minister who leads from the front and continues to support our work in earnest. At this time, it is indeed a privilege to now invite to deliver remarks the Honorable Wilfred Abrams, Minister of Home Affairs and Information.
Thank you. I think you missed the perfect opportunity with that introduction, talking about leading from the front, to refer to me as General, marshalling the troops. I'm not going to give it in one word because I've known her for quite some time. So for all you who are here who do not actually know her well, and all you online, let me give you a context. When I was growing up, the most popular drink in Barbados was a red fruity. A red fruity was full of sugar. If you gave a child a red fruity, the child was not going to sleep. So Paulavette is like a red fruity in a hot car that was driving on a very, very bumpy road that fell off the dashboard, rolled around the bottom of the car, and the child took it out and shook it for good measure, and then opened it. What comes out, that's Paulavette. Wrap your mind around that. On a way more serious note, P.S. Well, I have to acknowledge you in the protocol list, PS, but I can't miss the opportunity as well, falling behind Chairman Howell, to say that it was a pleasure having you as my permanent secretary. I am very sorry to see you go. I will miss you as much as one can miss a PS. I had a softening, because I know you back there with your face skin up somewhere, right? But you have really been an example as to how a PS gets into a ministry, assumes control of a ministry, gets hands-on with all the departments and the programs under them, and ably supports her minister. So I have said that in the hope that the next person coming will watch this replay, see the words used to describe you, and understand I will accept nothing less than that. The standard has been set by you, and thank you for that standard. Thank you. So, PS, Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs and Information, members of the board of the NCSA, staff, heads of department, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen who are here, and ladies and gentlemen who are online. A pleasant good afternoon to all of you. It is indeed a privilege, again, to address you at this meeting convened to share the findings of the 2023 Barbados Drug Information Network Report, or the BARDIN report. These meetings have become the cornerstone of Drug Awareness Month every year. And I look forward to them as they enable us and provide us with a valuable opportunity to stay abreast of what is happening on the local drug scene. This year, for the second time, the NCSA is celebrating Drug Awareness Month under the theme Strengthening Prevention. The theme is a powerful reminder that we must continually reassess and refine our strategies in order to effectively address the scourge of drugs and mitigate the impact of drug use and of the drug trade on our citizens, on our families, on our society, and on our economy. For us to have a fighting chance, we must know everything that we can about the enemy we are facing. And please note I said the enemy. See, there's the general thing again. So for us to have a fighting chance, we must know everything about the enemy we are facing. And BARDIN is critical in this regard. It allows us to track the drug situation, identifying both constant and emerging trends, and it offers data which serves as a solid foundation for evidence-based responses and strategic adjustments at both the policy and the programming levels. This installment of BARDIN points to the growing complexity of the drug situation through the continued presence and use of synthetic substances, the small-scale misuse and abuse of prescription drugs, and the increasing potency of marijuana on our shores. These developments highlight the need for multi-pronged responses and united efforts to enable us to get a handle on the situation and prevent it from spiraling out of control. The associated health and safety threats are of particular concern. These highlight the necessity of adopting a public health perspective over punitive approaches which focus only on punishment. Public health strategies prioritize compassion for individuals who use drugs and for their families as well, emphasizing treatment, harm reduction, and other initiatives to mitigate health risks. Such an approach also fosters opportunities for vital interagency collaboration, which will ultimately lead to the strengthening of our national responses. Adopting a public health approach will require adjustments not only in the work of those within the treatment and prevention sectors, but also among medical practitioners and first responders. These professionals may increasingly encounter emergencies involving adverse reactions or overdoses from substances that neither they nor the users may be fully aware of. So, I like to color it. Why this information is critical, especially for the medical person and the first responders. If you are called to a volatile or violent situation at a house, and you have no idea what that person is on and what the side effects of it are, whether it's paranoia, whether it's violence, whether it's suicidal ideations, whether it's People know by now the effects of marijuana, most people. People know the effects of alcohol, right? Try to control the person, get them calmed down. But for some of these psychoactive substances and the new synthetic drugs, right, we, along with the rest of the world, are finding out increasingly that the commonly held responses might not be the best responses and might actually put the first responders at risk. This is why the information that BARDIN provides and the research that we do is critical, right? We have to put everybody who is involved in this area on the best footing possible to handle it within their sphere of experience. So, as I said, because the first responders and the users themselves might not even be aware of the responses, the knowledge of these substances taken will be key to the administration of appropriate and effective medical treatments. For this reason, national toxicology testing resources, protocols, and reporting requirements are tools that should be pursued as we go forward. While I fully support the adoption of a public health perspective, it is important to emphasize that this does not mean disregarding the legal landscape. Legislative reform in the area of drugs and the drug trade is essential, particularly in addressing synthetic substances and other new psychoactive substances. Our current laws often fail to adequately cover these emerging substances, leaving significant legal loopholes that must be addressed. Many jurisdictions around the world have already begun to make these critical legislative adjustments, including some of our Caribbean neighbors, such as Trinidad and Tobago. Their experiences and the measures that they have implemented offer valuable lessons that we can learn from and adapt to suit our own context. By striking a balance between public health strategies and updated legal frameworks, we can create a comprehensive approach to effectively address the challenges posed by our ever-evolving drug landscape. This brings me back to my initial point, knowing the enemy and understanding the battlefield. These two factors are essential in determining the way forward. Tools like BARDIN, along with other research initiatives such as the local early warning system, traditional surveys, and qualitative studies will continue to play a vital role in identifying issues and offering potential solutions. For this reason, I strongly encourage all stakeholders, particularly the NCSA, which happens to fall under my remit, to continue prioritizing the production of valuable, reliable, and most importantly, timely data. Such data is indispensable for shaping effective strategies, enhancing awareness, and addressing the most pressing challenges with precision. When our decisions are grounded in solid evidence, we can confidently and consistently put our best foot forward. After all, in the words of Sir Francis Bacon, knowledge is power, and with it we can build a healthier and safer Barbados for all. So allow me to pause here and say something. I am glad that the NCA has partnered with other substance abuse organizations in Barbados, with Verdun House and Marina House. The collaboration between the two has put a face on things. We're a government agency. That's the reality. We're a government agency. So what we do is often viewed through the lens of being a government agency. The government has to do it. People tend to be territorial and operate in silos. So you jealously hold your corner and you try to protect it and lock it down and secure the funding and get the results. And you hold them close to your chest because you want the body to break the story and break the research and break the news and break the treatment. But that approach does not serve the interests of the persons that we're put here to protect. If our ultimate goal is reducing the demand for drugs and helping people control addiction, then we, as a philanthropic organization, as a human-based and humane-based organization, our reach should be as wide as it can be. We should encourage partnerships as opposed to shy from them. We should share resources as opposed to jealously guarding what is ours. We should share the information as widely as possible so that information gets to as many people as possible. Why am I saying all of this? At our church service, persons attended the service from Verdun and Marina. So you have, for starters, addicts who are coming forward to represent themselves. They put aside their shame of their addiction and accepted the acceptance part of the process. A youngster came out and gave a testimony in church, and at the end of it, everybody was clapping. Right? He was so excited to be in control of his faculties for the first time recently that he has so much to say about how God helped him turn his life around and the people at Verdun House. That then puts the flesh on the bones that we do. We do the bulk of the research. We come up with the governmental policies, but at the end of the day, we don't do it in a vacuum. We do it to better the lives of the people that we are contemplating when we do this research. So let me go to my most recent exercise. On Saturday night, I attended something at Frank Cullimore Hall. It was put on by Verdun and Marina Houses. It was a charity concert. Apart from it being an excellent concert, you had a number of persons there who I know to have been addicts. There's a fella I know, we used to call him a paro, right? He was as low as you can get. The man was well dressed. He looked good. He came out, and this is perhaps the third or fourth time I've seen him in about 2 years, so he's keeping himself good. You watch the who's who in Barbados. The people that generate the money, the people who fund a lot of these projects, interacting with the persons who they're raising the funds for. And everybody understood that reintegration and acceptance is a part of the whole process. You saw the multi-millionaires hugging and taking pictures with the addicts. Right? And everybody talking about how can we do more. I have seldom felt as satisfied as a minister as I have over the last month watching the activities for Drug Awareness Month. It says we're on the right path. It says that we're reaching our targets, our target audiences. It says that we're now in partnerships as opposed to in silos. So, Laura, disseminate this as widely as possible. It should not be only us who hear the benefits or hear the results of the BARDIN report. It should be everybody whom it can influence and whom it can influence for the better. So having jumped on your soapbox, I say in conclusion, I wish you all a productive and insightful session, and I look forward to the presentation and the discussions that shall follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Abrams, for always bringing to life the cause that we engage in our daily and ongoing activities here at the NCSA to achieve. And further to your remarks in respect of the evidence, certainly NCSA works from an evidence-based perspective. And today we are all eagerly awaiting our next speaker to present the findings, the key findings from the Barbados Drug Information Network report from 2023 is none other than our colleague, Research and Information Officer at the National Council on Substance Abuse, Mrs. Laura Foster.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Paulette. So you've heard a lot about some of the topics I'm going to speak about this afternoon. So I'm going to just kind of jump straight into things. And give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, so as always, what I'm going to do this afternoon, I'm going to start out with an overview of BARDIN. I know I see a lot of familiar faces around the room, and I'm sure many of our partners are joining us once again online, but I also recognize that I see some faces that I don't know. So I always like to put everybody on the same footing, so I give that background information first. Once I've done that, then I'll jump into the actual report. As always, I'll talk about the agencies that contributed, the findings themselves. We'll look at them by sector. We'll also look at some trends, and then let's make sense of it. So we'll talk about the implications of the findings and talk about some of the things that maybe we should be doing as we go forward. So, BARDIN, what is it? Well, this is very much a tool that we use. It's a national mechanism, that helps us to collect but also disseminate information on the drug situation. So we look at it on an annual basis. What have we been doing in terms of prevention, education, treatment, rehabilitation, and also law enforcement? Now, NCSA lies within, is the coordinator for BARDIN. So BARDIN lies within the NCSA. And so that means that we are responsible for collecting the data, preparing the reports, and hosting events such as these to share the findings with everyone. And one of the things to note about BARDIN is the fact that it's based on secondary data. So essentially this means that we're using existing data that lies at our various stakeholder agencies and in their offices. They'll submit that existing data to us, we put it together, and we produce these reports. And BARDIN goes back quite a long time. And we would have seen the first movements towards BARDIN in 2003, but the NCSA did have a number of challenges along the way. So there was a hiatus, and then by the time we came to 2011, we knew we needed to relaunch this thing. And that's when it came back on stream, and we were able to publish our first report in 2013. It was based on the 2011 data, and each year we've managed to produce a report since then. So this report is actually our 13th report in a BARDIN series. So that means that we are now actually one of the oldest. I think we're maybe the second oldest in the region when it comes to drug information network. So that's no small feat. That's something for us to be proud of. Now, you would have heard our chairman speak about the objectives of BARDIN. So I won't read them all over for you again, but essentially it's to help us have the data that we need to make the decisions that we have to make, and to, as you see at the bottom, to regularly update this information. So we always need to be staying at the cutting edge. So that's why we need to keep on track and don't drop the ball, so to speak. So we need to do this on a continuous basis. Now, in terms of the importance of BARDIN, one of the biggest features is that it allows us to identify patterns, but it also allows us to identify changes in our drug situation. And this is key. So we're talking about things like, the drugs that are motivating the need for treatment, what drugs are being seized by the police, who is seeking treatment, those sorts of things, because they help us to tailor our efforts as we go forward. And this type of information is key to what you would have heard mentioned many times this afternoon, an evidence-based approach. So again, gone are those days where we do things based on what we think or feel. We don't decide, we think the problem may be this and we feel this may be the best approach. We want to operate from a position of we know. Because if we're able to do that, then we can certainly craft more effective programs, more effective policies. And of course, then that means that we should essentially have a better impact. Now, there are also a number of other benefits to BARDIN. So remember, it is a network. So that means it helps us to promote that information sharing and interagency cooperation. So as the minister just spoke about, we're trying to get away from this siloism. We want to work together. It also helps to build the capacity within the agencies that work with us. So it helps to increase their data collection skills, their presentation and analysis skills, even for them, because they now have to start to collate the information that we need. And then it also gives us the opportunity to have reliable and standardized data. And that's something that we've really done with BARDIN, particularly since we introduced the MOUs. We introduced standardized data collection forms. So now we're collecting same age ranges, same types of information from all of the agencies, so we can now compare not only between agencies but from year to year as well. So that was a big jump for us in terms of improvements. Of course, it lets us know exactly what's going on, so we have a better understanding of the drug situation in Barbados, and it creates opportunities for a cohesive response, so a cohesive national response. In terms of the uses of BARDIN data. BARDIN has really proved itself to be quite a handy tool, and over the years we've started to see it being used as supporting evidence for programs, particularly in drug prevention and other related areas. It has helped us to identify issues for further research. So we use it here, it's used by other researchers as well. It informs policy development. So if any of you have had the opportunity to look through the Barbados National Anti-Drug Plan, you're going to see BARDIN data throughout that document, right? It's also used as supporting literature for academic research. So we've seen it in peer-reviewed journal articles. And then, of course, it's a statistical source. So it's used by international agencies as they compile data on Barbados and other countries. So you'll see persons like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and, again, CCAD coming to us for the data because they know we have it here. So let's talk about this current report. And it was 11 agencies that contributed to this report. We broke them down by sector, so you're going to see 2 in prevention, about 5 in treatment, and another 6 or so in supply control. And you would have heard mention of a newcomer. So I'm really happy to welcome on board the Forensic Sciences Center. It was a long time coming. It took us a long time to figure out exactly what we might be able to use from them, but we finally figured it out, and we're really happy to have them be a part of our network. And you're going to find their data within the supply control section. They're also joined by the Financial Intelligence Unit, the Government Industrial School, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, the Barbados Prison Service with their incarceration data, and the Barbados Police Service. In terms of treatment, we have data from the Psychiatric Hospital, the Substance Abuse Foundation, the Center for Counseling Addiction Support Alternatives, our counseling program here at the NCSA, and the Inmate Drug Rehabilitation and Counseling Program at the prison. In terms of prevention, of course, we have NCSA, and we also have data from the Edna Nichols Center. So I'm going to start with prevention, and I'll begin also with the NCSA. So we are the lead agency responsible for drug demand prevention in Barbados. So that means that we conduct a wide range of programs at the school level, at the community level. So we're in churches, workplaces, that sort of thing. We also do counseling here on site, and of course we also do our research. Now, because we are that lead agency, that government agency, it means that we interact with persons across the lifespan. So not surprisingly, in 2023, we saw persons as young as 4 taking part in our programming and all the way up to the age of 65. And for the vast majority of our interventions, they would have been involving drug prevention education. So that's what a lot of persons would have tapped into us for. And of those various interventions, the ones that we did in the community had the greatest reach. In terms of our counseling program, it's a very small segment, only 1% of our reach, but that's because of the nature of the program. So we're doing individual counseling, whereas when we do our drug education, we're dealing with groups. So naturally, we expect that to be the case because of the nature of the program. All right, so let's talk now about the Edna Nichols Center. And again, most of you would be familiar with the center. It provides rehabilitative programming for students who have been suspended or expelled from school, or those who also have been referred, and they can go there for a period of up to 2 weeks at any given time. Now, in 2023, there were 93 students who were admitted to the center. And as always, they were drug tested on admission. And what we found was that about 1/3 of those students, so 33%, who were tested on admission, they were positive for marijuana use, okay? And most of those who tested positive were males, and they were between the ages of 13 and 15 years. And that's normally about what we tend to see, right? That demographic. And what's still good news is no one tested positive for cocaine use. And we don't really see that, only once. I think we saw that over the years, but it's not a typical finding. Now, we don't have any information with regards to other drugs because they really only test for marijuana and cocaine. So that's just something to consider, okay? It doesn't mean that it's not happening, it's just that we're not testing for it. Now, in terms of treatment, what I'm going to start with is the demographic profile. So the persons who are coming into treatment in Barbados. And starting first with the gender distribution, you can see that across the board, regardless of the agency involved, males tended to be the primary persons coming in for treatment. And again, this is pretty much a typical finding. In terms of age, you're looking at persons in the 40 and under age category being, the main receivers or the main consumers of our treatment programs. You will find slight variations from agency to agency depending on the population that they focus on. So for instance, you'll see NCSA has a high under 20 population. That's because we focus a lot on adolescents. Our sources of referrals are things like the probation department, the school system. So again, to be expected. But when we look at like the Substance Abuse Foundation, they primarily focus on adults. So naturally, we expect to see the bulk of their people being, over the age of 21. So you will get those variations, but regardless, we know that it's our young people that are mainly seeking treatment. So those in the 40 and under age group. There are persons who will use one substance, so they will be single drug users, but there are others who will use multiple substances, so they will be called polydrug users. And this slide compares the percentage of persons who were being treated for polydrug use versus single drug use at the various agencies, and for the most part, it's mainly about single drug use, certainly at the drug rehab unit at the psychiatric hospital, at CASA and at NCSA. You will find for 2023 that polydrug use was more common at the Substance Abuse Foundation and the IDRC program at the prison. Maybe a reflection of the nature of those programs and the persons who are using them. But something to consider. But regardless, for the most part, we are looking at single drug use, but we can't deny the polydrug use because it can complicate the treatment process and sometimes make it difficult and more challenging. So it's something to keep in mind. Regardless of whether you are a single drug user or a polydrug user, persons will have a drug of choice, that primary drug. And this chart here shows the substances that were motivating the need for treatment in 2023. And as we always see, it's a lot about marijuana and alcohol and crack cocaine. So those are the bottom three tiers there. But what's interesting about this chart is that it also points, and I've highlighted them in yellow, so it's a little bit easier to see, certainly for the people in the room. You've got pockets of people who are seeking treatment for these emerging substances, right? Yes, they're quite small in comparison to those traditional drugs, but we can't deny that they're there because we're seeing persons being treated for lean, crystal meth, pethidine, ecstasy. So we got to take this kind of as a warning signal. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Yes, this is on record, but it's possible that there are other people out there. They just haven't come forward yet. So again, we can't ignore this. Now, mental illnesses and substance use disorders are very much intertwined, right? And in many cases, when you look at the literature, it's kind of a chicken or egg situation. You can't always say with certainty which came first. But what we do know is that they commonly co-occur, right? We see that internationally, and certainly we are seeing it here. This data shows that at the psychiatric hospital in 2023, a quarter of the patients who were admitted had a comorbid diagnosis, which included both a mental illness and a substance use disorder. Again, something of interest to note for our treatment providers, because that means that they need to consider that in treatment planning, right? That has implications for that, to better the outcomes for the persons involved. Now, supply control. We're going to start with the Barbados Police Service. And of the 6,228 offenses recorded by the service in 2023, about 16% were drug-related, all right? And when we look at the profile of our drug offenders, they're kind of similar to our treatment seekers in a sense, where they're primarily male, persons in the under 40 age category. And in fact, when we look at the chart with regards to age, we can see there's a sharp increase at the age of 20, and then a sharp decrease after 40. So you're seeing that bulk of persons in the 20 to 40 age category. Now, when we look at the drug offenses by drug type, we see what we've seen year after year, that cannabis offenses tend to be the most common. They capture the attention of our law enforcement officials most often. They're distantly followed by our cocaine-related offenses, and then we have this small percentage of ecstasy-related offenses that were recorded in 2023. Again, comparably small, but there's that smoke again that we can't ignore. Now, this chart, this is a comparison of the various drug offenses within each drug type. And what I did was I pulled out the possession, the trafficking, and the intent to supply, and then I lumped everything else together because the possession, trafficking, and intent to supply tend to be the greatest. Now, what we can see is with cannabis and cocaine that, well, actually for all of them, to be honest, possession is the biggest for everything. But cannabis and cocaine, we're looking at very similar distributions. Right behind possession, you're finding trafficking and intent to supply. But let's look over here at the whole situation with the ecstasy, and there's this great disparity. You're seeing that 3/4 of the offenses for ecstasy were possession related. Now, this may have something to do with our legislation. So currently, our legislation, so that would be our Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, Cap 131, that sets out trafficable quantities for substances such as cannabis and cocaine. There are actually only a few, maybe about 6 within the legislation that they have those quantities for. So it becomes an automatic thing. You're held with a certain amount, and if it's over the prescribed amount, you will be also charged with trafficking, and intent to supply tends to be inferred because of the amount that you have. Now, for ecstasy, there is no such trafficable quantity listed. And that's also the case with a lot of the emerging substances that we're seeing. So you're saying to me, but hey, I am still seeing a few little charges there for traffic and intent to supply. So how did you get those if there are no quantities? Well, what I have been made to understand is those probably came out as a result of the police investigation. So maybe what the person said while they're being interviewed, something like that led to the police being able to give those offenses. But I want to draw your attention to this because this suggests an inherent weakness in our current legislation, something that's opening us up to vulnerability, right? And that, you know, those same loopholes that you heard the minister speak about, that is something that we would need to address as we go forward. Now, seizures, again, it was mainly cannabis that was seized. It was seized in compressed, plant, and loose form. There were also some seizures of cocaine and a small number of seizures of methamphetamine and ecstasy. The police tend to lump those together. But again, only 4 seizures, and we see just over 3,000 tablets. Doesn't seem like a lot. But these things are so potent, it just takes a little bit to do a lot of damage. So let's not ignore that smoke again. Now, in terms of incarcerations, we see that the drug-related offenses accounted for 11% of the incarcerations at the prison in 2023. And in terms of our demographics, again, the persons who are incarcerated, it looks very much like our police data, primarily male, those in the under 40 age category as well. Not surprisingly, drug possession was the most common offense that persons were incarcerated for. This was followed by drug importation and drug trafficking. Those were the 3 biggest. You have a notably smaller percentage of persons charged with the possession of drug apparatus, as well as drug cultivation, and then some other unspecified offenses as well. Now, each year, the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit, they give us the sentence outcomes for persons who went into the courts and were tried for drug offenses so that we could kind of track what penalties are being given out. And this chart here shows us that the cannabis-related cases were just about 3/4 of the cases that were tried within the courts, the drug-related cases. But we can also see, again, a number of cocaine-related offenses, as well as those involving methamphetamine and sometimes a combination of the drugs as well. Now, the next two slides, if you look at the actual report, the table is a bit cumbersome, so I tried to pare it down to make it a little bit easier to grasp. So what I did for each substance, I pulled the top 3 offenses, and then I pulled the top 3 sentence outcomes for each of those. So for cannabis and cocaine, you can see those are presented here first. In terms of cannabis, possession, trafficking, and intent to supply were the top 3 offenses, and in each case, persons typically received, a reprimand and discharge. In terms of cocaine, it was possession of apparatus, and intent to supply. The possession and intent to supply often got a reprimand and discharge, whereas the possession and of apparatus typically got a CRD, right? A convict, reprimand, and discharge. Now, methamphetamine. So quick note here. When we saw these offenses were about 2/3 within each drug type. Over here, this is all of the methamphetamine cases for the year. So there were just a few, so I was able to put all. Whereas this, again, was about 60%. Now, in terms of methamphetamine, it was possession, trafficking, and intent to supply. Those were the only ones that were heard in the court. And again, here we go. Much like what we saw happening with the ecstasy, the bulk of them are possession related. So again, it's probably as a result of the legislation. Nevertheless, I also want you to pay attention to something here. The possession people typically got a CRD. There was 1 imprisonment, so for that 1 trafficking case, and then again, the intent to supply, CRD. So remember, these are relatively small scale responses then being meted out compared to the harm that something like methamphetamine can do, okay? Now, controlled substance, there were a few of those that were not identified, and of those cases, we saw possession, trafficking, and importation being the most common, and in each case, the persons tended to be imprisoned, though for importation, it was equally distributed. So you had imprisonment, the case being dismissed or withdrawn, and then the person receiving time served, right? Now, at the government industrial school, so this is our adolescents that are in conflict with the law, there were 81 wards that were admitted to the GIS in 2023. So some of them may have been remanded, a very small number committed, and a few were what they call overnighters. But regardless, they added to 81. Now, in terms of the offenses, there was only 1 drug-related offense on record for that year. We saw 1 ward being remanded for trafficking, and in this case, it was trafficking of cannabis, and there were no other drug offenses that year. On occasion, the court will ask that a ward be drug tested. So of those admitted, 11 were screened, and 5 tested positive for marijuana use. And kind of like what we saw with the Edna Nichols, it was all males between the ages of 13 and 15 who tested positive. And again, much like the Edna Nichols, no one tested positive for cocaine use. Now, over at the Financial Intelligence Unit, what we tend to be interested in is what they call suspicious transaction reports. So these basically are reports that they will receive from financial institutions and other non-financial delegates that are reports of what seem to be suspicious financial activity during the particular year. And these are interesting because they can show us a link between the drug trade and money laundering. And when they classify their SDRs, they will actually identify for us which ones are drug-related and which ones aren't. And interestingly, there was only 1 that was drug-related in 2006. Seems pretty, small scale, no big deal, only 1. But we also need to pay attention to these ones that had no easily identifiable predicate offense, almost 2/3, because ultimately, if those go on to be investigated by police, there's a chance that they can find that there was a drug link. So we can't discount those either. So don't just think, well, we don't have a problem when it comes to the drug trade and money laundering. There's still a possibility for that here. So that is something we always need to consider. Now, for our newcomer. At the Forensic Sciences Center, we saw that they mainly found cannabis sativa. So that lines up, because remember, this is what has been capturing the attention of our law enforcement officials during the year, and that was the bulk of what was seized. So not surprisingly, that was the main substance they found, and they typically found it in vegetable matter, because a lot of what they tested during the year was vegetable matter. That was the main thing. Nevertheless, there was a small amount of cases that involved resin as well. They did identify some CBD in liquid form and cocaine all in powdered form. But we've got all of these lovely looking, emerging substances over here that they also managed to identify. So we've got some MDMA, so that's ecstasy. They typically found that in tablets, but there were a small number of cases which involved powder as well as crystalline solid. In terms of methamphetamine, those were all tablets. We had some synthetic cannabinoids, and those were found in vegetable matter. Cathinone as well, so that was powdered. And then we have a combination of phenacetin and procaine. And so we don't actually know what the combination of that is. But nonetheless, this again highlights what I'm talking about, that smoke, these small bits and pieces of emerging drugs that we cannot deny. We're seeing it in all the different pockets now, from treatment to the police, and now even in the forensic lab. So it's definite that we have something that we need to pay attention to. Great, so now we're to our trends, okay? And again, this is, as I said, one of the key features of BARDIN, that we get to do this. As we go, I mainly limited it to 5-year trends. That's what I tend to do, because since we've had so many reports, it can become a bit cumbersome on the screen. But later down, we are going to have a chart that goes a bit further back. Now, starting with the Edna Nichols Center. What you can see here is on the left, the number of admissions during the period 2019 through 2023. And then on the right, the percentage of students who are testing positive for marijuana use on admissions during the same period. Of course, from the time we look at the chart with the admissions, we see that big drop that took place as COVID set in. But we are seeing the rebound over 2022 and 2023 as things return to normal. Now, in terms of our positive drug tests, again, we saw, while the numbers were dropping, we saw a big jump in the percentage. So at that time, I was thinking that it had to do with the small number of persons, that number that the percentage was calculated on, because it was 11. And now I'm pretty much convinced that was the case, because as the numbers have started to go back up, we're starting to see it coming right back down. So I'm pretty confident with that. But again, something to monitor as we go forward, because at this point, we're still only 2 data points out from that drop and that big increase. So we'll continue to watch that. Now, this is the one that I find particularly interesting. And this chart presents the THC levels for those students who were testing positive at the Edna Nichols Center over the 5-year period. So if we go back in time a bit, 2019, 2020, even 2021, we're seeing that, we don't want anybody testing positive, but for those testing positive, the levels tended to be on the lower side, so less than 50 nanograms per milliliter, maybe in the 50 to 149 range. But watch what's happening here. As we hit 2022 and certainly 2023, we're seeing a lot more on the heavier side, those higher percentages, those higher readings, So normally when you see high levels like this, it is either an indication of recent or chronic use, or the use of very potent substances. So in this case, potent marijuana. So it is possible that this is an indication of the increasing potency of marijuana in Barbados. And we are hearing anecdotal reports on the ground. The international literature tells us that the marijuana of today is not the marijuana of yesteryear. So it's very possible that this is what is also happening here. But we're going to talk about that a bit when we get to the back end, when we talk about the implications. Now, in terms of drug treatment, we saw, again, much like the admissions to Edna Nichols Center, you would have had that drop off with COVID, but we had that rebound that came out almost to pre-pandemic levels in 2022, and that pretty much maintained in 2023. So we're kind of on par to where we were before COVID. In terms of our demographic profile, much like what we saw for 2023 in years gone by, it was primarily males seeking treatment and those in the 40 and under age category. But I want to point out something else here. So while we say yes, mainly males seeking treatment, and we look at 2019 and we can see that it was 13.2% females, we started to get a little increase there. It was a steady increase over 2020, 2021, and 2022. But I don't know what happened in 2023, but we lost all those gains, or we're pretty much back to what happened in 2019. So it will be interesting to see if that was just a blip or if that continued in 2024 as we start to prepare the next report. But that was something that jumped out at me. In terms of our primary drugs across the 5-year period, again, we're looking at the marijuana, the alcohol, the cocaine. But again, these yellow things are pointing us to where we're seeing the pockets. So they are certainly much smaller in magnitude than the traditional drugs, but we're seeing them with more frequency. And we're also seeing that 2023 had some of the greatest diversity of the years gone by, and it has expanded to the point now that it's including some pharmaceutical things. We're talking about, ketamine, pethidine, things that we weren't seeing before. So that can also have implications for, on the pharmaceutical side of things, controls over there as well. In terms of our drug offenders, primarily males. It wasn't just this year. We typically see that, and also those in the 40 and under age category. But 2022 and 2023 are showing me a big increase in females, female drug offenders. So we're going to watch that. We're also going to look at something similar to do with the incarceration data in a minute. So just park that there in your mind for a second, okay? Now, in terms of our drug offenses by drug type, we are seeing, as always, primarily cannabis, but in 2023, we're seeing a bit more diversification. So those other drugs have crept up a bit. And from my recollection, there was a bit of a jump in cocaine as well, right? Now, in terms of our cannabis offenses, I always like to highlight this because we would have had that change in the legislation, back in 2019, 2020, when we would have introduced the Sacramental Cannabis Act. We would have made provisions for medicinal marijuana, and then we would have gone on to decriminalize the possession of small-scale possession of marijuana, so 14 grams or less. So from the time the changes came into play, we started to see a reduction in the possession offenses. So an indication of, less simple possession, because then we also then have the concomitant increase in terms of trafficking and intent to supply. And that is supported when we look at the data coming from the prisons. We are missing 2020. We didn't have any data for that year, but we saw a sharp decrease. It's fallen by about 50%, right? So these are the possession cases. So again, that supports that the notion that we've had fewer simple possession cases coming forward. So what was intended seems to have been happening, where we are getting less in the court system in terms of simple possession. Now, in terms of the gender distribution of persons incarcerated for drug offenses, this is the chart I said that goes back a bit further. Now remember, we had more females being charged in the police data, 2022 and 2023. So I thought, well, let me see what was happening with the prison. Is something similar happening over there? And as I started to pull the data, well, first I had a data gap in 2021, so that kind of was humbugging my five-year check. But then I also had a little situation here where 2019 was looking very similar to 2022. So then I decided, well, let me go further back. Let's get a wider picture. Maybe we can get a better idea of what's going on. And we can see that barring 2019, take that out, between 2015 and 2020, you're looking at about 7 to 15% of the persons being incarcerated being female. But then we get this big jump when we come up here to 2022 and 2023. We're looking at 21%, 22%. That is quite a difference. And again, is lining up with that police data. So this is something we need to watch. We need to see, does it happen again next year? But we'll talk about the implications of that in a moment. So that's my data. Let's start to make some sense of what we saw and consider maybe some of what we need to do. So remember, we spoke about the whole increasing THC levels at the Edna Nichols Center. We also spoke about those anecdotal reports of things we're hearing on the ground, these stronger strains being present, and then the international literature. Also, what I didn't show here, which I've seen with the GIS data, those rates are also going up, those levels of the test. I just don't have as many years to create the chart, but there has been an increase there as well. So to me, this is definitely pointing us towards that possible increase in marijuana potency. But again, remember, I'm only using the THC levels in those drug tests as a proxy at this point. I can't say for certain, but it's looking like that to me when I put all the pieces together. And the thing is that these newer, more potent strains of marijuana, yes, they may produce more intense highs for the user, but they also have the potential to create greater negative consequences. So we're talking about things like the increased probability of a cannabis use disorder. We're talking about increased possibility for overdose, withdrawal effects, those sorts of things, and other harms as well. And we really need to be particularly concerned about this among our youth, because remember, marijuana is particularly popular among that 40 and under age category. So we really need to be concerned. Now, as I said before, I'm only drawing an inference based on the available information, but we need to know with certainty, right? And we need the confirmed data. We need to know about the types, the potential harms that are associated with high potency marijuana. We really need to consider every possible avenue to curb the use of this substance. And one potential avenue is that of medicinal marijuana. So yes, there is a lot of mixed findings with regards to the relationship between medicinal marijuana laws and recreational use, but some studies have shown that medicinal marijuana laws may inadvertently lead to the belief in recreational marijuana. And one way that this could be achieved is through a dedicated public education campaign that intends to do that then. So we want to tell the public about the differences. And I think that because marijuana is so popular among our youth, we also need to put a special emphasis on that population, so the 40 and under in the campaign. And, you know, don't just limit it to one type of media. Use social media, traditional media, make sure and get the messages out, meet the people where they are at. And of course, we want to ensure that they're balanced perspectives. So for that reason, I think it is something that should be jointly spearheaded by both the NCSA as well as the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. So that is something we could partner on. Now, the next issue I would like to touch on is the growing presence of emerging drugs. So I kept showing you the smoke the whole way along the line this afternoon. And again, we have consistently seen it in BARDIN reports over the years. You know, those sporadic reports of persons going into treatment for what we used to term non-traditional drugs, but those emerging things like ecstasy, methamphetamine, crystal meth, etc. Those small-scale police seizures of things like methamphetamine and ecstasy, and the small number of persons who are charged with those types of offenses. Yes, as I said, the cases are still few in number, but we are seeing that increase and that expansion. We also had the early warning system alerts back in 2023 for methamphetamine and for synthetic cannabinoids. So again, we know they're here, and we have been looking into the matter more and more. And we had the opportunity last year, so in 2024, to be part of a 4-country study that was spearheaded by CCAD, the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission. And it was a qualitative study because we were kind of doing what they call a rapid assessment. We're trying to get some information on what was going on. And what we found in terms of the Barbados data is that, certainly the preliminary data suggests this, that ecstasy tends to be the preferred emerging substance of choice, followed by methamphetamine. And in terms of users, we're looking mainly at our young people again, but primarily males, okay? So that's something to consider when we look at the profile of the users, who they are, what they may be using. Now, the issue of emerging drugs has many tentacles, so we need to consider it from various angles. So I'm going to touch on a few of them over the next few slides. Now, again, one of the things about these substances is that they are very, very dangerous. Okay, the harms range from drug to drug, but we're talking about serious effects like heart attack, stroke, damage to major organs, even death on the physical side. On the mental health side, we're looking at things like, yes, addiction, but also anxiety, confusion, paranoia, hallucinations, delusions, insomnia, and violent behavior, things that can persist even after the user has stopped use. Okay, now, one of the things, and the minister would have alluded to it when he spoke, is that the users often don't know what they have actually taken. They think they know. They bought one thing, but that doesn't mean that's what is in the substance or that that is all that is in the substance. Okay? And that means that they really can't provide reliable information to the medical personnel who are trying to help them if they find themselves having an adverse reaction or an overdose. Okay? So the treatment then will be very limited in terms of, you know, what you need to save a life possibly in a given situation. Now, the medical treatment is further hindered by the lack of testing protocols which mandate toxicology screening in medical emergencies. We don't have any laws that mandate that. We also are very much lacking in the testing resources and the facilities which are needed to identify certainly these emerging substances. Right? So what do we need to do? Well, I suggest that we mandate and facilitate toxicology screening in medical emergencies and make sure that we are including the emerging substances in our screens where possible. But for this to be helpful, we need timely reporting. Okay, so we're certainly not looking for a situation where a medical provider draws off a sample, sends it for testing, and has to wait 3 to 5 business days for the result. We need as near as possible to real-time results because time can be critical in these situations, right? So we need the facilities, but we also need that timely reporting of results. Now, the value of the toxicology screening is not only limited to that immediate medical emergency situation, it extends far beyond that. Knowing the overdoses that have taken place, the adverse reactions, that can be useful to other medical personnel. So if they have a case that comes in, they will say, well, I knew about a case that happened last week or last month that involved X substance. It can be helpful to first responders. These persons can certainly help them. They use this to help them to identify and diagnose suspected overdose cases and then plan their course of action. The information can also be useful for us in prevention. We can use it to get an idea of what substances are being misused, which ones are most likely to cause adverse reactions. Then we can then use that to craft tailored prevention approaches, harm reduction approaches, those sorts of things, right? So you can see there is certainly more utility than just in the immediate situation. So for that reason, I'm recommending that there be the sharing of de-identified toxicology results. So nobody has to know who was tested and what was found, but we share those findings. And I think we need to mandate that. And it needs to be done through a formalized surveillance mechanism. Now, ideally, we would like to have a dedicated surveillance system, but of course, resources may not allow. So we can also consider putting it into any other existing medical surveillance system that we may have on island. But however we approach it, we need to make sure that that mechanism is capable of facilitating the timely exchange of information, as well as allowing for trend identification and tracking. Now, when we speak about emerging drugs, we also have to consider forensic testing because this, and by extension, the Forensic Sciences Center, is a critical component of our national response to the drug situation. And we have to know, as the minister said, who our enemy is. If we're going to have a fighting chance in the battle, we have to know who we're up against. So remember, our goal is to operate from an evidence-based position, both in terms of policies and programs. So this is where forensic analysis is going to come in. So at present, much like what's happening on the side with testing marijuana, there are resource constraints which are limiting the lab's ability to identify a wide range of emerging or non-traditional substances. So Again, if we want to be able to stave off, those potential public health and safety crises, we have to be able to know which of these drugs we have on our shores. So that said, I'm again recommending, now from the opposite side, before we were talking about marijuana, but now we're talking about emerging substances, that we expand the testing capacity of the center. So we want to be able to provide the resources that are needed to allow them to identify these substances. And some of the resource needs that were identified during the same qualitative study that I mentioned included things like additional staff, new equipment and upgrades to existing equipment. And what is very much needed will be additional testing standards. These are the things that actually help them to identify. Now, another key component to a country's response to the drug issue would be its laws. So as I said before, for us in Barbados, that is our Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, CAP 131. And this identifies the controlled substances here on island, and it also sets out penalties for drug-related offenses. Now, again, we would have seen when we looked at the methamphetamine offenses earlier that they were almost akin to a slap on the wrist, right? And that isn't only in 2023. When we track it for the last few years where the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit was providing the data, we saw something similar. And this is suggesting to me, because the law is there. Yes, we don't have trafficable quantities, etc., set out, but there are, broad-based provisions for, sentencing persons for trafficking, for intent to supply, for possession, etc. There's a certain bandwidth, so to speak, where these things are concerned that the judiciary can operate within when they're meting out different outcomes. And so what this is suggesting to me is that there may be a potential gap in the knowledge which the judiciary has with regards to the dangers posed by these substances, right? So they may not realize just how potent they are and how it only takes a little bit to do a big set of damage, okay? Now, again, we would have spoken a couple times this afternoon about the potential for legal loopholes, right? So remember, again, we spoke about those trafficable quantities, so we don't have those for everything, so that's one issue. And then we also have the fact that our act does not encompass all of the emerging substances available on island. Okay, so we definitely need to do some work where our act is concerned. I know it may not be possible to capture every single substance, but we can certainly follow and learn from some of the approaches taken in other jurisdictions. There are some ways certain ways to phrase the law. I'm not a legal expert, but we can look at what's gone before. And so for that reason, I am suggesting that, first of all, we have to deal with the knowledge gap if there is one. So we can develop and implement an education campaign that's, especially designed for the lawyers and the judiciary regarding these new substances and their risks. But then in terms of our law, I think we need to do an urgent comprehensive review of the Act, and we need to update it as necessary so that we can have a law that allows us to adequately address our evolving drug landscape. Now, the last area I want to talk about will be those recent increases that we saw both on the police data side and on the incarceration data side with regards to female drug offenders, okay? Now, why should we really be concerned? Well, internationally, more than half of female offenders, regardless of their type of offense, drug or otherwise, are mothers. And it's very possible that this extends to Barbados. So therefore, there will be concerns that surround the potential implications for the offenders themselves, but also their children. Now, research has shown that incarcerated mothers are more likely to experience things like anxiety and depression. They're also more likely to have a tendency towards self-harm and worsening of existing mental illnesses, okay? And that last one is something to bear in mind, because research has shown that the rates of mental illness are actually higher within the prison population than in the general population. So you're already starting at a disadvantage where that is concerned, okay? Now, these experiences, the anxiety, depression, etc., are made worse by the incarcerated mothers missing out on their children's life. So essentially, we're talking about missing important milestones, not playing a role in their children's well-being or academic success. Even something as simple as not being able to hold or to hug their children, all of those play a role. Now, maternal incarceration can also have an impact on the mother-child relationship, as many of the correctional system processes and procedures actually exacerbate separation, right? And they make it difficult for mothers to maintain a connection with their offspring. And so this then not only affects the mothers, but also the children, who are actually already a vulnerable group. And they're a vulnerable group because they likely are coming from a disadvantaged situation. They've likely been exposed to adverse childhood experiences, so inadequate housing, food insecurity, poverty, lack of personal safety due to violence, trauma. These are things that set persons up for, mental illnesses, for addiction down the road, those kinds of things. So these poor young people are already in a disadvantaged situation, but now they're also faced with another traumatic event. So they're likely losing, for the time the mother is incarcerated, who is probably their primary caregiver. This also then means that there are going to be disruptions in their living situation. So they may have to move in with extended family members. They may have to go into the care of the state. Regardless of what happens, it's certainly going to be very stressful and will not be easy for the children involved. Research has also shown that children of incarcerated parents are more likely to be the victims of stigma, bullying, and teasing. So when we put all of these things together, we're seeing young people who are at increased risk for poor outcomes. So they're, more likely to have anxiety, depression, aggressive behaviors. They're more likely to have increased risk for problem behavior, delinquency, expulsion from school, criminal activity, and drug use. Okay? Now, yes, the reaction to maternal incarceration is not one single charted path. It will vary from child to child, but studies have shown that the mother-child relationship can be a powerful factor in what happens. So based on what I've just showed you over the last two slides, what we do know is that incarcerated mothers and their children need interventions that respond to their unique needs and challenges. And so that said, I'm suggesting that the Barbados Prison Service work with relevant agencies to develop a coordinated network of service providers who have a suite of interventions which are specifically tailored and designed for this population. But again, I don't want us doing anything on a feel-good basis, right? We need to use evidence-based approaches. So we will need to do our necessary research here, but there are some evidence-based approaches which already exist externally, and we can use this as a foundation on which to build. Okay, and two excellent resources which can be used lie in the work of the National Institute of Corrections and the Council of State Governments Justice Center, both of which are based in the USA. And some of the examples of evidence-based approaches which are recommended by these organizations include something like offering video visiting for incarcerated parents and their children to maintain that connection, allowing child-friendly contact visiting to maintain parent-child attachments and reduce children's sense of abandonment, implementing parent education programs developed specifically for incarcerated parents and the issues they may face, offering mentorship programs for the children of incarcerated parents, and providing individual and group therapy for all involved. The reports have a lot more in them. Even on my report, I highlight some other initiatives that can be used. But certainly this is a launching point for us, okay? Now, the observed increase in female drug offenders underscores the need to consider and address other issues which may affect incarcerated women, and one of these is the issue of substance use disorders. International studies have found that as many as half of the women who are incarcerated have a substance use disorder, and it has been shown that women are more likely than men to attribute their illegal activities to drug use. So this means that adequate access to drug treatment is critical for incarcerated women, as incarceration alone is not the answer to a substance use disorder. However, in our current reality, most of the inmates admitted to the inmate drug rehabilitation and counseling program are referred by the courts, and some individuals could very well be missed at that point. So persons who need help might not be identified at that point. Also, the treatment resources at Dawes Prison are severely limited, which results in restricted access and long wait times. And there's also the issue of males and females receiving the same treatment programs despite differing on factors which should be considered in treatment planning. So they may very well have differences in the type and frequency of drug use, childhood, family environments, mental health, and physical health, things that really are very impactful. So to address these concerns, I'm suggesting the implementation of routine screening for substance use disorders on admission to the prison, and the referral of those with positive screens for further assessment and treatment. I'm also recommending that the IDRC program be expanded to increase the capacity and reduce wait times. And this is critical because longer wait times for entry into treatment is generally associated with poorer treatment outcomes and individuals not following through with treatment. And lastly, I'm also recommending the implementation of gender-specific treatment programs at the prison. We're almost there. And last but not least, I want to consider the implications of the observed increases in female drug offenders for prevention professionals. Much like the need for gender-specific treatment programs, the increase also suggests the need for gender-based prevention interventions with a specific focus on females, particularly those at high risk for drug abuse. So we're talking about trauma victims, those with a history of ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, etc. And support lies for this lies with when we look back at the female drug treatment admissions. Remember, we saw that the gains we made had dropped off. So we can find some support for that as well as the link that I would have mentioned before between drug use and illegal activities among females. Okay. So there's definite support for a gender-based approach, and we would not be alone if we decided to walk that road, because undertaking a gender-based approach actually would allow us to align with the hemispheric perspective that says that gender equality is a cross-cutting issue. So one that we need to consider and incorporate into the design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of drug policies and programs to ensure that men and women have equal opportunities to attain their full potential and their human rights. Now, we're here. We've reached the end. I know I shared a lot with you, and so I just wanted to wrap up by reiterating the main takeaways. So for 2023, we saw that during that year, the drug landscape was very much similar to that of previous years. Alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine were the most prevalent substances on record. Males aged 40 and under were the demographic most likely to seek treatment or to face legal consequences for drug-related offenses. We saw that there has been an increase in female drug offenders and a concomitant decrease in females seeking treatment, which together highlight the need for gender-specific drug prevention interventions, as well as programs designed to meet the needs of incarcerated females and their children. Other noteworthy developments included the potential increase in the potency of locally available marijuana and the growing presence of emerging drugs. High potency and emerging drugs pose a significant health risk, which underscores the need for a robust national response, which should be guided through a thorough understanding of the drugs involved. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm going to hand you back over to Paulette at this time.
Certainly another round of applause for those key findings from the Barbados Drug Information Network report for 2023. Very comprehensive presentation. We also at this time would invite questions from both our audience present with us and those online from the media personnel who are here. No questions. Yes, indeed, a very comprehensive report, and certainly persons will take note of the fact that the publication will be available in short order. You can visit our NCSA website at www.ncsa.gov.bb and click on the research tab, and the report will be cited there for further review. It has been a wonderful afternoon, and we have all learned a lot and been availed of these new key findings. At this time, however, it is important to acknowledge and to I give way to Honorable Minister Abrams.
So, in case you wonder why when I come out here, I appear to be rocking back, I assure you I am not under the influence of anything. It is just that almost everybody who has spoken so far has required the use of something that you can't see. There's a very, very small padded step that I am up on that's causing me to rock. Others whose feet are smaller plant themselves firmly on the step and appear to be more stable. It is all an illusion. I'm amazed every time you do one of these reports, because the level of detail in the report and the analysis gives us some significant information upon which we can act. I looked at your recommendations. I saw you were very bold in some of your recommendations as to what the government should or should not be doing, as to what the forensic lab should or should not be doing, as to what the prison should or should not be doing. And I commend you, because quite frankly, that is what we want. People often are very hesitant to suggest policy changes. And they will couch it in language that you can't ignore. Based on what you presented and then your recommendations after, there's certain things we can't ignore. So I actually will have the discussion with the superintendent of prisons. I will have the discussion with the Attorney General in relation to what the lab needs to be looking more at, because you make a good point. You have traces of marijuana, right? But what? I mean, marijuana ranges in potency from here to up here, right? We need to know what is here. We need to know what is influencing some of the behaviors that we're seeing. So I don't wish to add to the time. I just simply wish to say that I came again, and I was again amazed at the level of research and the production of the information. This is what we expect from departments such as this. These sort of reports with evidence-based findings and evidence-based recommendations are exactly what it is that we require to be able to act and to be able to create and draft policy. So I just want to thank you again for your report, but not just you, because the NCSA has done some phenomenal work over the last couple of years. Some phenomenal, phenomenal work. Yeah, you can clap for that. And all of the others who engage in the substance use reform, all of the other agencies who participate and hold your hand in going, and the more persons that we can actually get, the more agencies we can get contributing to this, is the more in-depth we can get, the more specific we can get, the more we can tailor our response based on what it is that we find. So, in a nutshell, I want to end by congratulating the NCSA for another stellar year and the production of their report. This may sound real bad, but I look forward to when we can have in the substance abuse month 2025, I can be talking about the 2024 report. So I'm challenging you now in the same way that you challenged me. You should never have gone there, right? But let us get to the point where the report comes out pretty much in time for the start of the following year, right? Or as close there. I mean, you could have your cutoff point at maybe September, October, if it is necessary. Because since this is done, there are probably other things that may influence what it is we actually need to be doing, right? But having said all of that, that is me nitpicking at you, because normally in government we get reports 10 years, like when all efficacy, all proximity has gone. So congratulations, well done. You issued me a challenge, I issued you a challenge. And I know because the last one I issued you a challenge, you stepped up and you delivered. So I expect that from you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those words of reassurance, Minister. And certainly, we look forward to being given much more and delivering even more excellently. Ladies and gentlemen, it is at this time that we must give thanks and acknowledge all of the various personnel and inputs that made today's delivery of the 2023 BARDIN Drug Information Network report possible. And therefore, it is indeed at this time most worthwhile that we have none other than our indomitable manager here at the National Council on Substance Abuse, Mrs. Betty Hunt, who will now deliver closing remarks.
So good evening, everybody. I can't restrain upon that because I have heels and I may very well fall right off. So good evening, everybody, and I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Laura, job well done. I say that. I know it was a lot of hard work, but as I sat there, chair, a minister, as I always tell staff, I'm in the departure lounge, but the NCS is in good hands. It is in good hands. And all that is needed now is a follow-through on the recommendations. As you were going through your report, I was writing some recommendations, and Minister actually to see what is the extent of gambling and to see how we can go forward and address that as well. So it is good that we are collaborating. As we are here, we want to make special mention of the Substance Abuse Foundation, which is represented on our board. They came forward. They collaborated with us right through the entire month, supported our activities, and I want to say this is just the beginning of a sustained collaboration because it really made a difference. It really made a difference. We also held an activity with the Drug Education Counseling Services on Sunday. Nice intimate service, and they also promised to work with us, and they too are doing some good work. I think what is missing in all the work that all the agencies are doing is this collaboration. I keep saying it, this collaboration, a way to find a mechanism that if our strength is research, then we do research. If your strength is treatment, then you do treatment and have persons get what it is they need when they need it. I think that is absolutely critical. Yes, and I do agree with Minister Laura and Troy. You always heard me say, don't wait back on the agencies to send the information, publish what we have, so that we can get a little more up-to-date information, because I know that is really important. Minister has already tasked us with reviewing the legislation that exists, and that is something, Minister, that we will continue to do and send a report to you, because that is going to be critical as well, having legislation flexible enough to respond to these emerging substances. Over the past 2 days, we got 2 reports of possible substances that are being made available, let me be very careful, made available at primary schools. We've sent off some for testing, and I've asked to see if we can get a sample of something else. Troy will speak to you, which came into my possession today. And that is worrying, not outside secondary schools. We're speaking of being offered by adults at primary schools. And that should tell us where our head is as adults when we are addressing this whole issue of drug use. And so as we advance the initiatives, I just want to say look forward to the collaboration of all the agencies involved, so that we can continue to build our local evidence base. I think the time has come for us to, yes, we can draw on our international research, our international data, but if we as a nation start building our own evidence, we can use our scarce resources in a more efficient manner. So again, as I close, I want to thank you, Laura. I'm really pleased this evening, I really am. I see the hard work that has gone in, and your analysis was on point. Quite often we present data and we cannot understand how it applies to us, but I really saw the what is in it for me coming out this evening. So again, Minister, thank you for your support, You really lead from the front when it comes to the NCSNR initiatives. General. Yes, sorry. Thank you, General. You lead from the front. I think I have to address you like this. Thank you, General. You lead from the front. Yeah. And I also want to add my comments or P.S. Goddard, thank you, have been a thorough support. You've responded when we've asked questions and so on. And between yourself and Minister have kept us on our toes. Staff will tell you, I always tell them that you've kept us on our toes. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for your support. Thank you everyone for coming and sharing this afternoon for us. And I do look forward to having you here and continuing the collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manager. And certainly at this point, we wish to again thank all of you for being present with us here at the NCSA headquarters and online as we now sign off on today's event, which has been the release of findings from the 2023 Barbados Drug Information Network report. Thank you.